For today, you need a binder, the foldable that says Transformations of Parabolas, and a glue stick to glue it onto your note page. We'll be looking at pages 3 and 4 in your note packet. So there's a few key words you need to know for this section. So the first thing you need to know is parabola. So you might want to highlight parabola in one word. And a parabola is the shape of this graph, so it's U-shaped. And this is the graph of y equals x squared, which we call a parent function, which just means it's the original graph. The second thing you need to know is the vertex, and the vertex is this point. It's like the starting point of the graph. It's either going to be the very bottom or the very top point. So previously you did a discovery and you graphed a bunch of different parabolas, and you should have noticed that they were moving up and down and left and right, or getting skinny and wide. And this should look familiar to you because we did this with absolute value earlier in the year. And so hopefully if you were trying to fill this in on the activity from yesterday, you would have known that if out in front of your A value you had a positive, that means that it opens up. And if you had a negative, it's going to open down. If your A value was greater than 1, your graph would have gotten skinny. And if your A was a fraction between 0 and 1, it would have gotten wider. If your H was a positive number, and what I mean by that, just H. So the formula is x minus H. So say that H is like 2, positive 2. It would look like x minus 2. And so if it was a positive H, it was going to be moving to the right. If your H was negative, so like say it's negative 2, what you really would see, because this simplifies, is x plus 2 squared. And when you see something like that, it actually moves to the left. So just be aware that the formula has this negative in it, and so it makes it look like it's a positive 2 and it's moving left, but it's really x minus negative 2. And then lastly, your k value, if it's a positive k, your graph is going to shift up. If it's a negative k, it's going to shift down. On Google Classroom, you should be able to see an assignment that's a quizzes. So you have about 15 minutes to attempt the quizzes. You need to get an 80% to get credit. If you don't score 80% when time's up, you can attempt it later. It will be open until tomorrow at noon. So take about 15 minutes now, pause the video, attempt the quizzes, try to get an 80% to get credit. Now that you're done doing the quizzes, we'll do a few more examples. So it says, describe how the function listed below is different from the parent function by circling the function's property. Also indicate whether it opens up or down. So we'll just go through one at a time. So starting with this 1/3, it's a fraction that's between 0 and 1. So that means it is going to get wider. I have this plus 4, and we talked about earlier, the formula is x minus and then a number. So for this to turn into a plus 4, I really had x minus negative 4, and this would mean it actually is going to shift left. My k value is plus 5, which tells me it moves up 5. And then lastly, does it open up or down? So you look at your A value. My A value is technically positive, so it opens up. On the second example, we'll start with the same thing. So the A value out in front is technically a 1, which means it doesn't get skinny or wide. So I'm not going to circle either of those. My H value is technically a -7, remember, because if I see a positive, it means minus negative. And so that actually means it's shifting left. My K value is a -1, which means shifts down. And lastly, I have a negative out in front, which means this thing opens down. For example 3, my A value is 1/2, which means that it gets wider. I don't have any parentheses here, which means there is no H value, so this does not move left or right at all. K is +5, which means shifts up 5. And out in front of my A, I have a negative, which means this opens down. Take a few minutes and try example 4 by yourself. So starting with my A value, I have 5, which means this gets skinnier. For my H value, remember the formula is x minus h. So this is actually a +2, which means that it shifts right. For my K value, it's a +9, which means it shifts up. And out in front, technically this 5 is positive, so that means this graph opens up. For example 5, there is no A value out in front, so this does not get skinnier or wider. My H value is a +1, so remember again, the formula is x minus, so this is really a -1, which means it shifts left. There's no K value out here on the end, so this does not shift up or down. And my A value is technically positive. There's technically, if you wanted to think about it, a +1 out here, but we don't write it. And so this opens up. Go ahead and take a few minutes and try example 6 by yourself. So pause this video for a few minutes. So on this example, my A value is 3, which means this gets skinnier. Again, my H value is technically a +8, which means this shifts right. My K value is a +4, which means shift up. And out in front here, I have a negative, which means opens down. For today's classwork, you're going to do a matching activity. So you will need to look at an equation, match it to a graph, and then also match it to a description like we just did. So shifts left, shifts up, shifts down, wide, skinny. And you're going to do that on the paper in class. The graphs and descriptions are going to be listed on Google Classroom. So you need to get on there to actually see what you're matching, and then that will be due at the end of the period.